Human biology has remained remarkably static for the last 2.5 million years. The bodies we inhabit today were forged on ancient savannas, optimized for constant movement and a diet of wild game and foraged plants. Yet we live in a sedentary, industrialized world. Researchers Eaton and Connor proposed that chronic diseases of civilization result from an evolutionary discordance between our ancient genetics and current environment. Contemporary diets derive most energy from refined grains, dairy, fats, and sugars, macronutrients completely excluded from human diets for millions of years. To understand the physical ailments plaguing modern societies, we have to trace the timeline backward, examining the origins of how early humans first engineered their own survival. 3 million years ago on the vast African savanna, early hominins lacked natural armor and frequently fell prey to the continent's apex predators. The shift toward predatory efficiency began with a single, deliberate mechanical action. By striking one river cobble against another, early humans created the Oldowan chopper, a synthetic, razor-sharp edge that their biology did not provide. Tool-making evolved into complex design. The Acheulean hand axe required a maker to envision a shape within the stone before a single strike was made. Achieving this teardrop form required advanced spatial reasoning and precise bifacial flaking to maintain exact symmetry. A sharpened stone edge allowed hominins to slice through thick hides, to butcher massive megafauna, and access calorie-dense bone marrow left behind by other predators. With a reliable way to process high-energy food, Homo erectus began expanding their range well beyond the African continent. Mastering this material provided the nutritional surplus required to grow a larger, more energy-demanding brain. The manipulation of stone directly fueled human biological evolution. By 36,000 years ago, the environment had shifted to a brutal ice age. In this freezing climate, human activity expanded from basic physical survival into complex symbolic thought. Deep inside European cave systems like Chauvet and Lascaux, early humans navigated complete darkness. Using flickering firelight and grinding earth into mineral pigments, they applied imagery to the cavern walls. These images depict the apex predators and massive herbivores of the Pleistocene landscape. The overlapping black outlines of rhinoceroses display an anatomical precision that required intense, deliberate observation of the natural world. The artists layered pigments to show perspective and simulated motion by repeating the legs of the animals. Alongside these highly realistic figures, they painted abstract, branch-like symbols and geometric patterns, demonstrating an advanced capacity for symbolic representation. These subterranean galleries document a transition toward conceptual mastery. By replicating the forms of their predators, our ancestors were conceptually mapping the environment they inhabited. Roughly 12,000 years ago, the global climate warmed drastically. The massive glaciers of the last ice age rapidly retreated, and the open, frozen tundras were quickly replaced by dense forests and expansive river systems. The sudden environmental shift triggered a mass extinction of the slow-moving, cold-adapted megafauna that humans had relied on for millennia. To survive, nomadic hunting bands had to adapt their tactics to catch smaller, faster, and more elusive game in the new woodland environments. Heavy spears were no longer effective. Toolmakers developed microliths, tiny razor-sharp pieces of flaked stone. By embedding these small blades into wooden or bone shafts, they engineered aerodynamic arrows, lighter throwing spears, and barbed harpoons. In these dense forests, tracking prey became significantly harder. Humans began domesticating wolves, forming an interspecies hunting partnership. Early dogs provided superior tracking senses and early warnings of danger, heavily increasing the hunting yields for human bands. For over 2 million years, human existence was strictly nomadic, requiring constant movement over vast distances. As the warmer climate produced abundant lakes and river basins filled with fish and wildfowl, human bands began lingering in one location for entire seasons. Across the globe, the endless wandering began to slow. Hunter-gatherer populations clustered near these new, stable water sources, constructing the first semi-permanent camps. The retreating ice effectively concentrated humanity into localized pockets of environmental abundance. This quiet settling laid the structural groundwork for the most drastic societal reorganization in human history. Throughout the 20th century, archaeology relied on a standard model known as the Neolithic Revolution. The sequence was widely accepted. Humans first invented agriculture, established permanent settlements, and only then developed organized religion. The logic was strictly economic. Building large-scale monuments requires a massive stationary labor force. Without the surplus calories provided by domesticated crops and livestock, it was assumed impossible to support the construction of complex architecture. In 1994, German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt surveyed a hilltop in southeastern Turkey known as Göbekli Tepe. What he uncovered buried beneath the soil broke the established historical timeline. Radiocarbon dating placed the construction of the site at roughly 9600 BCE. The builders had no pottery, no domesticated animals, and no agriculture. They were entirely nomadic hunter-gatherers. This timeline chart places Göbekli Tepe at 9600 BCE. It sits isolated on the far left, a full 6,000 years before the first stones were dragged to Stonehenge, and even further before the construction of the Great Pyramids in Egypt. The existence of an elaborate stone complex dating back to the end of the Ice Age meant the accepted sequence of civilization was entirely backward. The monument came before the farm. The site consists of multiple concentric circles, formed by massive limestone monoliths. Over hundreds of years, workers quarried, transported, and erected T-shaped pillars standing up to 5 meters tall and weighing up to 10 tons. The broad faces of these pillars were intricately carved with fierce predators, scorpions, and stylized human features. This level of detailed, high-relief masonry was executed using nothing more than flint and other stone tools. Excavations revealed no signs of permanent habitation, no trash pits, and no domestic hearths. Klaus Schmidt concluded the site was a central sanctuary, a destination where dispersed bands of hunter-gatherers converged to perform massive religious rituals and communal feasts. Maintaining a ceremonial center of this magnitude required intense logistical coordination. Hundreds of laborers had to be organized, directed, and most importantly, fed while they worked on the hilltop. Supplying enough wild game and foraged plants to sustain these gatherings eventually became unsustainable. Researchers now suspect that the immense caloric pressure of feeding these religious builders drove nearby populations to experiment with cultivating wild cereals, leading directly to the domestication of wheat. The resulting agricultural yield allowed human populations to grow exponentially. Settlements grew into cities, labor specialized, and eventually humans discovered the smelting of copper and bronze, rendering their ancient stone tools obsolete. The bodies we inhabit and the metabolic risks we manage are anchored in the deep past, but the very structure of our settled society grew from an abstract drive to build. It was the desire for communal ritual that created the conditions for domestication, ultimately bringing the Stone Age to a close.